So we're back. New year, new videos, new shows to talk about. And this year we're kicking it off with The Jetsons. It's an old show, I know. I actually finished watching it last year, but things got really intense during that time, so I couldn't make the video until I got enough freedom. And then my phone got stolen. I've been after it ever since. Really messed up stuff. Anyway, let's talk about every 90s kid's favorite futuristic family from Cartoon Network, The Jetsons. As you already know, we'll chat about the characters and then the show itself as a whole. There isn't a big cast and there's barely any complexity in the characters and plots, so this will be an easy one. First up, we have the patriarch of the family, George Jetson, a normal guy who just wants to provide for his family. He's about 40 in the show, if I'm not mistaken. He starts off as a strict, no-nonsense dad who's bullied at work by his boss in the first episodes of season 1. Then as the show goes on, he becomes a tough dad with a soft heart who can barely control his family and gets straight up abused at work. It isn't just bullying at that point, it's actual abuse. But then again, we have to put things into context a little better. We'll get into that later. George's job is to push buttons at Spacely Sprockets for 2 hours a day. Yeah, that's what it's like for him. He usually comes to work late and is often caught trying to mess with the machine so they don't register that. He's overall an okay guy, a law-abiding citizen, and a positive influence. Aside from the whole doormat thing he has going on with his life, he's a pretty nice guy, realistically douchey, but a nice person to be around, always pushing his kids to be the best that they can be. Speaking of his kids, we have his boy Elroy. Elroy is a pretty cool kid. He's in elementary school where they learn astrophysics and advanced equations. The future sounds like a real fun place for kids. Anyway, Elroy didn't get his courage from his dad because unlike him, he actually stands up for himself against everyone, no matter who they are, even criminals. And they come across a lot of criminals in this show. A lot of episodes are about the family's run-ins with notorious criminals. Funny how that works, actually. Elroy is a genius and is shown to be smarter than everyone in his family. If we were to look at his future, he'd probably end up as either an engineer or an inventor because of how often he comes up with new gizmos that help the family out. He also has the common sibling relationship trope with his older sister where they argue all the time but stick up for each other when it counts. Speaking of her, we have daughter Judy, who is a teenager, around 15 or 16. She's obsessed with being popular and dating the hottest guys around, which she usually does. Sometimes George is totally against it, and other times he makes fun of her for it. In fact, everyone makes fun of the number of guys that Judy dates, and trust me, they're not just 2 or 3. Teenagers, raging hormones, they never change. She's not as academically gifted as Elroy and displays average-level intelligence. Her social aspirations put her at odds with her family, especially her dad a lot of the time, and she always ends up realizing that her dad really does want what's best for her. Her antics cause friction, not just with George, but between George and Jane, with Jane being the one who sides with Judy and George being against them. Speaking of Jane, she's the typical housewife, always either home or shopping for groceries or her own stuff. She doesn't have a license, and George is always scared whenever she manifests interest in driving because, well, something weird always happens when she drives. She even traumatized her instructor. This one time, she became a getaway driver and traumatized the criminal. All in all, she's a nice, kind lady who knows how to put her foot down but still can be submissive to her husband. She's also got a wild side that George can't handle and was clearly a loose cannon in her high school days. George was just very smitten over her. We also have Mr. Spacely and Mr. Cogswell, who runs the company, well, Cogswell Cogs. Go figure, very creative. They often engage in a battle of wits to try and run the other out of business. Spacely is a vain, selfish, cruel, manipulative, vindictive, shallow, abusive, and irresponsible man whose wife has him on a leash. Cogswell is vain, opportunistic, a little less selfish, and more of a businessman than Spacely, from what we see at least. There are also the pets, Astro and Orbit E. Both were found and adopted by the Jetsons in the show and had very touching stories in episodes that focused on them. Well, now that we've gone through the characters, let's get on to the show. The show is set in the future where we have flying cars, conveyor belt sidewalks, flights to Mars and the moon, skyscraper apartments, robots, and a very quick court system. It doesn't deal with societal issues like what people of today would want to see in a remake. It's just a fun children's cartoon set in the future. The show's flow is fine and the stories are about family dynamics with each person having their issues. A lot like the other family show, The Flintstones. It was also a nice surprise to see that the Jetsons are descendants of the Flintstones in their crossover movie. They really endear you with the stories about closeness and appreciation of family. My favorite episodes were the ones with corporate espionage. There's nothing those two CEOs wouldn't do to screw each other over. It was really funny. My favorite episode with espionage was when George had to pretend to be a woman and seduce Cogswell. And it worked. And he was trying to smash. That is until his wife showed up. This thing was very interesting for a kids show. We also got some insight into Spacely's inner workings and saw that he was the same vain, evil, opportunistic anus even as a child. We saw that even when they were children, Spacely was using George's hard work to make money and was barely giving him anything, yet was making so much money. I guess Spacely had it all planned out since childhood. It was all part of the grand design. To see that it hadn't changed even when they were adults was just weird to see. I'm guessing here it means that it's like poetry. It rhymes. The worst part is that even though he suffers so much abuse at the hands of Spacely, he is fiercely loyal to him. Even when he got fired and Cogswell offered him a better job with a better pay in his company, George refused and instead worked hard to get his job with Spacely back. And eventually got it back. And I'm thinking to myself, just what kind of simp George is to be a full-grown adult and behave like this. The story of George and Jane is also interesting. See, she was almost in a relationship with some other guy that George didn't like or get along with in high school, and we get insight into that as well. We see what his life would have been like if they didn't marry. He'd still have Rosie, the housemaid robot, but no one else. Jane would be happy with her husband. Heck, I like what she says when George argues about the guy in the normal reality.
He doesn't have your replayola.
With or without it, he's still the bum he always was.
George, your jealousy is showing.
Me? Jealous of Bunky? Ha!
Just because I liked him a little and he did a few things better than you did.
You liked him a lot. He had a nice car, took you to nicer restaurants, and I suppose he even kissed better than I did.
I didn't say that.
You did not say it.
No, I didn't.
It really puts into perspective some expectations you have of your potential relationship partners, doesn't it? Plus, Jane is 32 at the start of the show, and George is 40, Judy is 16. Before you get any weird stuff in your head, think about how neither George nor Jane have white hair, but Judy does. There's something we're not being told there. Maybe. Anyway, my favorite character is Elroy because he's smart, charming, and has a really cool vibe to him. He doesn't let anyone talk him down, and if you lie on him, he won't just sit there and take it, no matter who you are. My least favorite is Astro. He's very annoying and gets overly involved even when he doesn't have to. His voice is annoying, the way he talks is annoying, and his constant need to prove himself is even more annoying. I remember this one time he messed up George's baseball game by switching out a bat because he thought he wanted to help. Or rather, he did want to help. Even though George was already doing well. I remember this other time he got Elroy into a spaceship because he was chasing a robot cat, and they ended up going to space and aging until they got old. Man, I hated that guy. But then I can't leave Mr. Spacely out of it. Both of these characters were the reason I stopped watching the show as a kid. They just did so much wrong, but they never suffered for it. Anyway, the show is nice. Some episodes made me feel like a kid all over again, and others brought back so many memories. I like how George works 3 hours a day and has 3 days off, but complains when he has to work weekends, and they frame it like it's abuse. I also like how his job, as they describe it, is just pushing buttons. In fact, it's not them who describe it, it's George himself who describes it. I also like how Jane complains about housework, but she just pushes a couple of buttons and everything is done for her. And she has a robot maid. Honorary mentions go to Rosie, who is a no-nonsense, stern but soft robot who endears herself to the family. There's also Henry Orbit, the superintendent of the Jetsons apartment building. I liked him a lot. Anyway, that's all we've got time for in this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Please follow our pages on Facebook and Instagram, and if you haven't, subscribe to our channel. You'll get more content. I promise. See you around.